Dr. King once said, um, um, riots are the voice of the unheard. And so when I see what happens around the country, because we're in a season that's called a pandemic that has kind of deteriorated all of our patience, and we're having to focus on things. And then I see the response, the protests and the looting and the marching and the walks. I understand all of them, and some of them would probably be more positive than other expressions, but they're all there, and it's trying to I think tell us about ourselves. That people are hurting, and I think one of the things that we can do is learn to listen in a little bit better.
In a dark place, I'm the king of the darkness. Oceans open up, they hear my prayer. God, you told me once, the all-time savior, I could grow to be a demon slayer, but I gotta choose which side I fight for.
What would you say to the people that are, and I think it's out of love of Joplin, that there's a little bit of maybe a denial happening, or just a lack of understanding, where people say, I don't think we do have racism in this area.
Yeah.
I don't think, outside of a few crazy people, I don't think that really exists in our businesses, or that's happened in our Chamber of Commerce, or that there is less opportunities, for minorities, or like we're past that. Why are we talking so much about this here?
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
So many of those folks and friends would listen to a guy who's one of his more famous sayings is facts don't care about your feelings. And to them, I would say, well, look at the facts. And the facts with regard to Joplin is that we are a 1/6 person of color, and the Chamber of Commerce is 1/400th person of color. And so do we have a problem that needs to be looked into? Is there a place of area of growth? Obviously, yes. We cannot have 1/6 person of color and chamber representation be 1/400th. That means that the minority community, the people of color, are vastly underrepresented within the economic development rhythms of this community. Why that is important in Joplin is because economic development has actually drove this community's growth for the last 100 years. So when people of color are not represented there, we have to ask ourselves, why? Why are the people of color in this community who are business leaders not feeling the ability to step into positions of leadership or wanting to join into those civil organizations, the civic organizations that actually will help their business grow even more? Is it a personal thing? It could be. We could have a personal apprehension to it. Is it a communal aspect? Well, it could be. There's certainly ways that you can say, hey, everybody's welcome here, but everybody knows not everybody's welcome here. And so I think let's look at that, and we can't be anybody other than who we are. We're 88% Caucasian. So when we want to be a diverse community, it's going to look differently here. But back to what I said earlier, diversity is what you purpose. You can live in a place like Chicago and live within your own community for the totality of your existence. So although you have access to a wide percentage of different groups and different faith systems, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, you could live your whole life in a Latino or Hispanic community. Same here in Joplin, but here in Joplin, you could also have lots of access to diversity. And whether that's socioeconomic diversity, ethnic diversity, religious diversity, we are a pretty small community, and yet we have a very strong Christian community, Jewish community, and Muslim community. For the size of our community, that's pretty unique that you could find that kind of diversity present here. So for those friends who would say, maybe we're over talking this, I would say, remember how you treat your spouse or people that you are friends with or love. If we just say, let's just stop talking about it and somehow that's going to fix it, That's usually not the right posture. Let's lean into one another and say, okay, I've been at this now about 20 years in this conversation of whether it's racial reconciliation, whether it's prejudice, whether it's discrimination, racism, sexism. Even within the last 3 years, I was in the process of negotiating something, and in my mind came a pretty negative phrase that almost came out of my mouth. And I realized, oh man, I've got areas of growth. I don't understand why we have made this kind of the unpardonable sin. Like it's not that we're anticipating that we're all perfect in this. I'm not perfect in it. I have prejudices that I'm trying to overcome, stereotypes that I'm trying to overcome. So if I'm trying to overcome them, the least I can do is give someone else the benefit of the doubt that they're also maybe anticipating or trying to do that in a positive way as well. So I just think we live in an imperfect world, and we'll say that when we make mistakes. But when you make a mistake, I anticipate you're going to be perfect. And maybe we ought to give one another a little bit more latitude and grace and space that when you make a mistake, I'm going to give you the opportunity to correct it. And if you correct it, man, that's good. But if you're unwilling to correct it, then we can have the hard conversations that go along with obstinance.
Why do you think racism is still a recurring problem in our country and even here in the Joplin area? Like, why is this still happening? What do you feel the core of that is?
I feel like it's still happening because of ignorance and because it's something that is taught. If you're brought up to believe something is bad, someone is beneath you, they're not any good, they're not as great as you are. If this is taught to you from your grandparents, your parents, your family members, friends, then that's what you're going to believe. If people are being ignorant to the problems that are going on, and they're not taught the differences or educated on what has been going on for so long and why it is wrong and why that it is not right, then they're going to keep teaching their children about that. And so it's just a recurring cycle. It's never going to end. And I feel like when you're in a small town, especially, and you're not exposed to different races, different ethnic backgrounds, things like that, then that's what those children are going to keep believing. And so it's going to keep reoccurring.
I'd probably say we still have racism in Joplin because of a lack of education and intentionality. I'd say both hand in hand. On one end, the lack of education of there are people who I've talked to in the past month who, when you mention something such as redlining, something that I thought this is very common knowledge that redlining was a thing. When you mention a man being lynched here in Joplin, when you mention certain things that are realities in terms of racial injustice, we're just not educated. People just have no clue. So you have this lack of education. On the other hand, and a lack of intentionality. I don't think racism is something that will just go away. I love people. We're not good enough to just one generation to eradicate racism and we never have to think of it again. Illustration, I guess. Health issues run in my family. Heart issues specifically run in my family. It'd be foolish for me to think just because my grandmother decided to take care of her health and address some of her health issues that I can just stop thinking about it altogether and thinking I'll never have to confront them. And I think that's what happened with race is saying, well, Dr. King did his thing, so we don't have to do our thing. And racism just kind of grew up again, grew up even more, I'd say, in this context of us not being intentional about it.
People need to realize that this didn't just happen. And I'm not even just talking about the racial riot, different stuff like that from back in the 60s. It didn't just happen. This was by design. This is what America was founded on. This is how the systems was put in place. This didn't just pop up, and you hear black on black crime. You hear, well, there's white on white crime too. But what is portrayed more? It's always Black people in crime, Black people on a welfare, Black people, anything negative, then that's what we're put on the forefront. Even though statistically there's more white people on public assistance than there is Black. There's more white people committing crimes against each other than there are Black. And so those little forms that are out there, those little forms of racism and those are the controlling mechanisms that keep it going. It perpetuates it and keeps it going. Because until you change the policies, until you change the system, how is that ever going to be changed? How is it going to be any different? How are you going to see me as fully qualified, fully capable, fully everything that you are until we do away with those things, until we make some kind of change?
I think Joplin is beginning to display itself as a forerunner when it comes to addressing issues related to race. Already several platforms have been formed where community members are coming together and trying to organize and be strategic about how to address issues related to race. And so I think that Joplin has the capacity to set a great example for what it looks like when a community stands up and is really intentional about addressing issues related to race. It is going to take some work, a lot of work actually. It will also take some transparency and accountability on the part of everyone. I also think that we need to move into a better understanding that racism is a real thing. For me personally, I believe that we all need to address our implicit biases, that you cannot grow up in America and not end up with some level of biases towards people because of their race. And that is true not only for people who are white, but for people of color as well. So I think Joplin can do amazing things, but it's going to require a shift in mindset for some of Joplin.